Both Elliot Anderson and Carlos Baleba want Manchester United moves in 2026. Despite many clubs being in for both players, they would pick Manchester United. We're going to talk about the latest reports on that. Casemiro's exit is happening, is very likely to happen, and it looks like Manchester United are thinking, we missed out on Declan Rice a few years ago. Casemiro's been great, Casemiro's been brilliant, but if we get him out the door, we save like nearly 20 million a year in wages. We can bring Elliot Anderson in, who's younger, who's fresher. That looks to be what could happen. João Gomes could also be brought in the January window, with the player potentially pushing for a Manchester United move. Will Wolves sell in January? That's the big question. Vitek speaks out about his dream to obviously break into the Manchester United first team. And Semenyo, obviously, Ramon said that we will be looking at a Semenyo type player, but didn't necessarily name Semenyo earlier today. Ben Jacobs went on the United stand, gave a lot of information on the United stand earlier today, and he spoke about Semenyo and revealed some interesting stuff that we're going to dive into in today's video. So, hello, and welcome back to Alice Talks Football, and welcome back to your 10-minute roundup. If you're new to the channel, every single evening on the channel, I do a 10-minute video rounding up all the news in 10 minutes for you guys, so you're up to date very quickly, and then I do longer live streams in the day. I want to dive right into the first of two stories on Elliot Anderson. Newcastle correspondent Craig Hope on Elliot Anderson's future. So this is one of the best Newcastle-based journalists with very good connections in and around Newcastle. And he said, this might not be what Newcastle fans want to hear, but my information is that the chances of return are fairly low. So this is on Newcastle going up for Elliot Anderson. There's sort of been a rumour that it'll be Man United versus Newcastle in for Elliot Anderson this summer. And obviously Newcastle fans are dreaming of this, but they did sell him. My instinct is that one, if not both, the Manchester clubs will make a serious play for him. Now, the way I look at it is, Rodri's had injury issues and maybe isn't quite at his best anymore, so they may want to look at a long-term replacement for Rodri. But Nico Gonzalez has been excellent this season for Manchester City. They've got Reinders, they've got Foden. They've got those three midfield positions somewhat filled. They have Nunes that can play in midfield, Bernardo Silva that can play in midfield, Cherki that can play as a 10. I think they might look at a midfielder City with obviously what's going on with Rodri and injuries and maybe his legs going. But, you know, City have a lot more options than us in midfield. So I guess we can say we're a bigger club than City and we can guarantee you more minutes than City, particularly if Rodri stays, which might pull Elliot Anderson to us. However, if you go to Manchester City, it's a safer move. There's more stability there. If you aren't great, you're not going to get half the media attention. It depends if Elliot Anderson wants to be the guy that brings United back or if he wants stability. But it'll be interesting to see if City go in for him. But United will go in for him. And we know from multiple reports over the last few weeks that he's a serious target for United. Baleba was the midfield priority. Baleba's a serious target for United. But the last couple of weeks, it's really shifted towards Elliot Anderson. And I think the reason it's shifted towards Elliot Anderson is because Casemiro leaving is almost guaranteed happening unless he signs a new contract on a very reduced wage. Casemiro is likely to leave United. The club views Elliot Anderson as a possible replacement and are monitoring his progress for a potential summer move. The clubs are unlikely to trigger the one-year option in Casemiro's contract, and the Saudi Arabian clubs are ready to offer him a lucrative deal. So we don't want to trigger the one-year extension in his contract because that would put him on over 300 grand a week. As good as Casemiro has been this season, as important as Casemiro has been this season, 300 grand a week is nuts because we don't know what he'll be like next season. And he can play one game a week, but he can't play two. I like Casemiro, and I'd love Casemiro to stay on a reduced wage. But when he's got big offers from the MLS, potentially in Saudi and other clubs, and there's still a good player there, he's probably not going to take that wage cut unless he thinks, I want to spend another year or two at the top level. Because now the World Cup's going to be out of the way in the summer, I don't know if there would be anything that would keep him at United another year. So I do think Casemiro is leaving, or is likely leaving Manchester United. And I think Elliot Anderson is probably what they view as the ideal replacement. And as I said earlier, Elliot Anderson, you know, the feeling is he picked United over Newcastle, despite being a Newcastle boy. And interestingly, we know that Carlos Baleba would pick Man United over anyone. Ben Jacobs went on the United Stand YouTube channel today and said lots of things, so I do recommend checking out that video after today's video. But I'm going to mention a few things that Ben Jacobs mentioned, and that was on Carlos Baleba, that Baleba wants Man United, and personally I think it would be a big surprise if the two clubs, one Man United and one rival, agree a fee with Brighton. I think it would be unlikely that he'd pick another club over Man United. So it depends on Brighton and how much they lower the fee, because United aren't willing to pay out what Brighton want, but Baleba wants the move. Baleba really wants to move for United. It's unlikely that he'd pick another club over us. He's desperate for that big move to Manchester United. We know that Elliot Anderson potentially would pick us. We had reports coming out a couple of weeks ago that Elliot Anderson wanted a Man United move. We know Baleba would pick us over anyone. We're in a good position going into 2026, where we know that Baleba for sure would pick us. Elliot Anderson we think would pick us if we can get them in 2026. The feeling is we can only get them in summer, not January. But to have those two midfielders coming in 2026, particularly if Baleba can find his form from last season, would be huge, would be massive. In terms of January, what can we do? Man United like João Gomez, and suitors of Gomez may be interested to try their luck in January, considering Wolves' position in the league. There is a feeling if Manchester United get João Gomez, it would happen in January. There's a feeling that if we can get Wharton and Anderson in the summer, or Baleba and Anderson in the summer, we probably won't go for João Gomez. But there's a possibility United go for João Gomez, particularly in January, because it could maybe happen in January. And United might want someone in the midfield now. They might want to let Kobbie Mainoo go on loan. The question is, can João Gomez play with Bruno? Because we're looking at someone that we might have to rotate Casemiro with. That is the question. I think he'd do well in the midfield too, but I think he's more of an all-action 8. But if Wolves are open to selling him, apparently, according to many credible sources, João Gomez would only cost, I think, £40 million if Wolves decide to sell him, which I don't think is that bad considering his age and everything. Let's continue on into more news and stories. Manchester United's second goalkeeper, Vitek, I actually spoke about him earlier today, and reports that him and Amas could come back into the first team next season and challenge the current first team players, which I thought was interesting. I said, obviously, we don't want the Dean Henderson De Gea situation where one player barely plays and is unhappy, but I do think Vitek could be some healthy competition follow-ons, and I also think with Vitek, I'm hoping next season we're in the Europa League, so we have a lot more games where we could actually play them both and see who's better, because Vitek could be better than them once, we never know. But Vitek did say one day it would be a dream to play for Manchester United, but I take it game by game. I know there's a big chance in front of me, but I want to improve every week. He's at Bristol. He's focused on Bristol. He's doing fantastic at Bristol. Player of the Month awards. Of course, he's thinking about going back to United and competing with Le Mans, but he's not trying to get ahead of himself too much. He's trying to focus on what he's doing now, which is a very, very fair answer. In terms of the final bits of news, I want to talk about Semenyo. Okay, it just cut out, and I don't really remember where I was at, but I was talking about Ben Jacobs. He went on the United stand. He said multiple things, so definitely go check that out after today's video because there's loads of detail. But Romano said yesterday, we're looking for an attacking-minded player. Basically, he described Semenyo. We know from Ornstein last week that Semenyo is available for £65 million. Ben Jacobs said a couple of things about Semenyo. Man United are interested in Semenyo. If United move for Semenyo, it will be because they want to add another winger/10. Ineos want a specialist wide player who's devastating on the counter-attack. Semenyo falls into that category. Despite that he can play left wing-back, he's very intent on being a winger because that's where his form is coming from. I think if the club moves, it will be because they see him as a winger/10. I see him as a 10/wing-back. Well, a winger/wing-back, to be honest. I think with Semenyo, he'd sometimes play 10, sometimes play wing-back, depending on who we're playing. I like Semenyo. I do agree that he's probably better further up. However, this season, because Kirkus has gone in, Semenyo is playing a much deeper role and actually carrying the ball a lot more for Bournemouth, which is why I think he'd thrive in the left wing-back role, but I don't know if he'd want to play that. I think he'd want to play as a left winger, which we don't really do. With Kunran and Boomer, we sold the left 10, right 10, which kind of suits those players, where Semenyo is a left winger, we're trying to sell left wing-back. Maybe he won't pick us. We had dinner with him. We've bid for him in the past. We like Semenyo. United likes Semenyo. United are clearly interested in Semenyo. We don't know if United are going to go for Semenyo in January, 65 million, very good player, because they brought in Cunha, Sesko and Boomer. So we don't know if United are going to go for Semenyo in January, but we know that United will be looking that way. We know that, they liked Semenyo, but I think midfield is where we're probably going to be prioritising. But I think it was one to watch. I think one thing I noticed is we don't have someone devastating off the bench. If we have a front three of Cunha, Sesko and Boomer, Mount and Xerxes are our bench options, and they're not like devastating pace. I do think we need someone like Semenyo with devastating pace off the bench, but because we're not in the Champions League this season, we don't really need the depth that much. That, to be honest, we need a midfielder now, but we don't really need Semenyo to the summer. But if we could get Semenyo, Anderson and Wharton, I'd be so happy with that if we could get those players, or even Semenyo, Anderson and Baleba, I'd be so happy if we could get those players over the line. Anyway, Listen, people, thank you so much for watching today's 10-minute roundup. Please do go ahead and hit that like button if you did enjoy. See you next time. Bye.